He was not trained to fight, not allowed to carry a weapon, and not even listed as a combat sailor. Yet when Pearl Harbor exploded around him, Doris Miller picked up a machine gun and fired back. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Doris Miller was serving as a mess attendant aboard the USS West Virginia when Japanese aircraft began attacking Pearl Harbor. His official duties placed him below deck preparing meals and serving officers, a role assigned to black sailors by Navy policy rather than ability. When the first bombs hit, Miller was helping carry wounded men to safety, including the ship's mortally wounded captain. Fires spread rapidly. Ammunition detonated. The ship began to list. At some point during the chaos, Miller was ordered to abandon his assigned duties and assist where he could. He made his way to an anti-aircraft gun, despite never having received formal training to operate it. Navy regulations at the time did not allow black sailors to man such weapons. Miller ignored that reality. He loaded the gun, aimed at incoming aircraft, and fired until ammunition ran out, or the gun was disabled. Eyewitness accounts later confirmed that he remained at his position under sustained attack, returning fire while bombs and strafing runs tore across the harbor. In the immediate aftermath, Miller's actions were known aboard the ship, but not named publicly. Initial Navy reports described the heroism of an unnamed Negro messman who had shown exceptional courage under fire. The omission was deliberate. At the time, the U.S. Navy maintained strict racial segregation. Black sailors were barred from most combat roles and excluded from advancement beyond service positions. Acknowledging that a black mess attendant had independently manned a machine gun and engaged enemy aircraft posed a problem. It contradicted the justification for segregation itself. If a black sailor could perform heroically in combat without training, the policy restricting him from such roles collapsed. The Navy chose containment over recognition. Pressure from the black press changed that. African American newspapers demanded that the sailor be identified and honored. Civil rights organizations amplified the story. Public attention made silence impossible. Eventually, the Navy released Miller's name and awarded him the Navy Cross, making him the first African American sailor to receive the honor during World War II. The citation praised his bravery, yet stopped short of acknowledging the broader injustice. Despite his actions, Miller was not promoted into a combat role. He was not retrained as a gunner. He was returned to mess duty. The recognition existed, but the system remained intact. What happened next defined the pattern that would follow Miller for the rest of his service. He became a symbol without becoming equal. The Navy used his image in recruitment and propaganda while refusing to alter the policies that had confined him. His heroism was celebrated as an exception, not as evidence of systemic failure. Miller himself rarely spoke publicly about what he had done. Those who knew him later described a man aware that recognition did not translate into opportunity. He had saved lives, defended his ship, and stood his ground during one of the most significant attacks in American history. Yet the institution he served treated his actions as an anomaly rather than a turning point. This is where the erasure began, not through denial of courage, but through limitation of consequence. Doris Miller had done everything asked of him under fire and more. What he did not receive was the freedom to step beyond the role the Navy had assigned him. His story did not end at Pearl Harbor. It was only beginning. The decisions made after December 7th would determine whether his bravery changed anything at all, or whether it would be absorbed, minimized, and quietly neutralized by a system not ready to confront what his actions truly meant. This contradiction became most visible during the Navy Cross ceremony itself. Miller stood in uniform, receiving one of the Navy's highest honors, yet his rank and duties remained unchanged. The award acknowledged what he had done, but not what it meant. For white sailors, decorations often led to promotion, new assignments, or leadership opportunities. For Miller, recognition ended at ceremony. He returned to service roles that placed him below decks, out of sight, and away from combat. The message was clear. Courage could be acknowledged, but equality would not follow. The Navy had found a way to honor him without allowing him to disrupt the structure that confined him. As the war continued, Miller was reassigned like any other sailor, moving through the Pacific Theater as the Navy expanded its operations. He served aboard the escort carrier USS Liscome Bay, a vessel tasked with supporting amphibious operations during the Gilbert Islands campaign. Life aboard the ship followed the same segregated routines. Black sailors performed service duties. White sailors filled most combat and technical roles. The memory of Pearl Harbor lingered, but it did not translate into authority or influence for Miller. He remained respected by some shipmates and overlooked by the institution that had briefly placed him in the spotlight. His fame did not protect him. It did not elevate him. It followed him like a shadow that never opened doors. On November 24, 1943, the USS Liscome Bay was struck by a Japanese torpedo during the Battle of Macon. The explosion detonated the ship's bomb magazine, tearing the vessel apart in seconds. More than 600 men were killed. Doris Miller was among them. His body was never recovered. He died as he had lived during the war, serving aboard a ship in a navy that relied on him without fully accepting him. His death did not receive the attention his earlier heroism had attracted. There was no dramatic ceremony, no national outcry. The war moved on. So did the institution that had once used his image to rally support. In the years that followed, Miller's name faded from public memory faster than his story deserved. His Navy Cross remained a footnote rather than a starting point. The question of whether he should have received the Medal of Honor resurfaced periodically, raised by journalists, historians, and civil rights advocates. Each time, the answer was delayed, deferred, or denied. Official explanations cited standards, evidence, or precedent. Unofficially, the same discomfort persisted. Elevating Miller further would require acknowledging that his treatment after Pearl Harbor had been unjust. It would require confronting the reality that segregation had distorted not only opportunity, but honor itself. This phase of Miller's story reveals the most effective form of erasure. It does not deny bravery. It absorbs it. It transforms heroism into propaganda while leaving structures untouched. Doris Miller became useful as an image precisely because he was kept powerless as an individual. His life after Pearl Harbor shows how institutions can celebrate symbols while neutralizing the people behind them. By the time the war ended, Miller was remembered as a moment, not a man. The system that praised him had ensured that his courage changed very little. What remained unresolved was whether history would continue that erasure or finally confront what his story demanded. Doris Miller's death did not end the debate over what he deserved. It froze it. With his body never recovered and the war still raging, his story slipped into a space where heroism existed without resolution. The Navy Cross citation remained the official endpoint of his recognition, even as questions continued to surface about whether that honor truly reflected what he had done. Black newspapers kept his name alive, reminding readers that Miller had manned a machine gun he was not allowed to touch during an attack that reshaped American history. Civil rights advocates pointed out the obvious contradiction. Other sailors who had performed comparable acts during Pearl Harbor received higher honors, including the Medal of Honor. Miller did not. The difference was not the action, it was the man. After the war, the United States entered a period of self-congratulation, celebrating victory while avoiding uncomfortable questions about inequality within its own ranks. Segregation in the military remained in place until 1948. In that environment, revisiting Miller's case was inconvenient. Acknowledging that he had been denied full recognition because of race would have undermined the narrative of unity the country preferred to tell itself. As years passed, institutional memory hardened. Standards were cited. Procedures were referenced. Each delay made correction less likely. Miller's heroism became widely known, but officially unresolved. He was remembered as brave, but not brave enough, honored, but not fully. The gap between his actions and his recognition became normalized. This ambiguity shaped how Miller was presented in history. He appeared in textbooks and documentaries as a symbol of progress rather than a case of injustice. His Navy Cross was highlighted as evidence of change, even though it had not changed his circumstances in life. The focus shifted from what he had been denied to what he had received. This reframing softened the reality of his experience. It allowed institutions to claim moral growth without addressing past decisions. Over time, Miller's story was told in fragments. Pearl Harbor, the machine gun, the medal, the death. What was often missing was the through line, the deliberate choice to limit recognition, the refusal to let his actions challenge segregation, the silence that followed. Pressure to revisit his case never fully disappeared. Historians continued to compare his actions to those of Medal of Honor recipients. Veterans groups submitted petitions. Members of Congress raised questions. Each effort encountered the same response. The Navy maintained that standards had been applied correctly at the time. Evidence was deemed insufficient. Precedent was invoked. Yet the same system that demanded documentation had once refused to name him at all. The burden of proof rested on those seeking correction, not on those who had controlled the record from the beginning. What makes this period especially revealing is how institutional delay functions as denial. No single decision was required to erase Miller further. Inaction did the work. Each unanswered request, each postponed review, each deflection allowed time to perform what discrimination no longer could openly justify. By the late 20th century, most of the men who had served with Miller were gone. Eyewitnesses had died. The moment that demanded correction had passed. What remained was a legacy shaped as much by silence as by courage. Yet Miller's story continued to resonate beyond official channels. For Black Americans, he remained a powerful reminder of service without equality. For younger generations, his life exposed the gap between American ideals and American practice. He had fought not only an external enemy, but an internal contradiction. That contradiction did not die with him. It lingered in the way his story was handled, postponed, and softened. By the time broader recognition began to emerge decades later, it carried a different weight. It was no longer about honoring a sailor in uniform. It was about acknowledging that the nation had failed him while asking everything of him. Doris Miller had become more than a war hero. He had become a measure of how long justice can be delayed when institutions are unwilling to confront their own past. The question was no longer what he had done. It was why it had taken so long to say it mattered. The correction of Doris Miller's legacy did not come naturally or quickly. It came after decades of pressure, changing social attitudes, and an institutional reckoning that could no longer be avoided. By the late 20th century, the civil rights movement had forced the United States to re-examine many of the contradictions it had once ignored, including segregation in the military. Miller's name resurfaced as historians and journalists revisited Pearl Harbor with fresh scrutiny. Comparisons between his actions and those of Medal of Honor recipients became harder to dismiss. In 1996, the Navy finally acknowledged that race had played a role in denying black sailors equal recognition during World War II. While Miller's award was not upgraded, the admission itself marked a shift. It was a quiet acknowledgement that the system had failed him. Years later, the decision to name a new Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier, the USS Doris Miller, carried even greater symbolic weight. For the first time, a U.S. Navy ship would bear the name of an African-American sailor, and not an officer or political figure, but an enlisted man whose heroism had once been minimized. The naming was presented as an honor, but it also functioned as an implicit correction. It confirmed that Miller's actions had always mattered, even when the institution was unwilling to say so. Yet recognition after death raises difficult questions. Honors bestowed decades later cannot alter the reality Miller lived through. They do not change the fact that he returned to mess duty after Pearl Harbor, that he was denied advancement, or that he died without ever seeing the barriers he broke removed. Posthumous recognition repairs the record, but it does not repair the harm. It risks transforming injustice into a closed chapter rather than an ongoing lesson. The Navy can point to the USS Doris Miller as evidence of progress, but that progress came long after Miller himself paid the cost. His story forces a distinction between honoring memory and confronting responsibility. One can celebrate his courage without fully addressing why it took so long to do so. Doris Miller's legacy matters because it exposes how institutions decide who represents their values. During the war, the Navy needed his bravery, but not his equality. After the war, it needed unity more than accountability. Only when the moral cost of silence outweighed the convenience of omission did recognition follow. This pattern is not unique to Miller. It reflects a broader truth about how marginalized service members are often remembered only when their stories no longer threaten existing structures. Miller's courage did not change policy in his lifetime. It changed history slowly, through persistence, memory, and pressure applied long after the guns fell silent. Remembering Doris Miller is not about retroactive hero worship. It is about honesty. It is about acknowledging that American victory in World War II was achieved alongside injustice, not apart from it. Miller fought for a country that denied him full belonging, and he did so without hesitation. That fact complicates comfortable narratives of unity and sacrifice. It reminds us that bravery and equality are not the same thing, and that one does not guarantee the other. The final lesson of Miller's story lies in what it demands from the present. Recognition should not require decades of advocacy. Courage should not need permission to be acknowledged. When institutions control memory, they also control accountability. Doris Miller's life shows how easily heroism can be celebrated in theory while constrained in practice. His name now stands on a ship that will sail the world's oceans, a powerful symbol of what was once denied. But symbols are only meaningful if they carry memory with them. This story does not end with a ship's christening or a corrected record. It ends with a question: how many others served, fought, and died without their names ever being restored? Doris Miller was not erased because his actions were unclear. He was erased because his actions exposed a truth the system was not ready to face. Remembering him fully means refusing to let courage be separated from justice ever again.